Hello, I am finally making another video. I realized at the beginning of this year that I really haven't read any books for the last 2 years. I wanted to set myself the goal of reading 23 books before I turned 23. I was calling it 23 before 23. Today's my 23rd birthday and I hit my goal and then some. I have read 39 books this year, which I'm really happy about. I really enjoyed it. I want to do this next year. I want to do 24 before 24. For context, I have been in Cyprus for about 2 months now doing an internship working with turtles. It's been amazing. And over this time, I've been recording little book reviews here and there for all the books that I've read this year. I wanted to put all those book reviews together just to have like a document of everything that I read this year, and hopefully I can encourage someone to do the same challenge that I did this year. This ran from January over to today. Not every book that I read this year is going to be on here, so it's going to be a little less than 39. So what I am suspecting is going to be the bottom book of the year is The Thief on the Winged Horse by Kate. I don't know how to say her name. I don't think she wants her name attached to this. This entire book felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was reading the third book in a 5-book series with no context. I don't think there was a single interesting scene or interesting character. I'm not really going to talk about it much because maybe it is a great book and it's just not for me. Bottom book of the year, I did not like this and I would not recommend it. It felt fanficky. It felt really fanficky in the way that the characters were described. So next up is Guest Book by Leanne Shapton. It's very like, if you turn analog horror into a book, it's basically just like little vignettes and little photographs that are like stories. And if you read the book, which I don't think anyone has, but if you have read it, there's a story about like a guy and like a ghost that help him to play tennis better. And it's all very dark and it's all very like implied storytelling. I love that story. That story gave me chills. The rest of it is very vague and I don't love the rest of it. It felt like the concept got away from it. Like, it's a very gorgeous piece of art, and so it's kind of hard to rank it. But a lot of these are just kind of like, this is a picture of a bedroom. All right, next up is The City and the City by China Melville. Actually, the concept of this is that there are two cities that occupy the same geological space. Very like 1984 vibes, where you're not supposed to see the other city. Even if there's someone from the other city walking down the street, you know, there's designated colors, there's designated things, you're supposed to know that you're not supposed to acknowledge that they're there. And that is a really interesting concept. And I really respected that the book didn't have a 3 pages at the beginning monologue, or it never had the main character even kind of slowly tell you about things. The main character kind of notices things throughout his day and throughout his life, and gradually you kind of pick up on like, okay, I kind of see what's going on here. I find this one hard going. I found it kind of hard to understand what was actually happening. And not even in terms of like the city stuff. I mean, just like, I make a rule for myself that I don't read police procedurals because I find them really boring. I will say the part where he actually breaches is such a shocking moment, and it really, really got me. I think his banter with the detective that he works with in the other city is really fun to read about. I enjoy that friendship. I think other than that, there's not a whole lot that really hooked me into this book. It feels very impersonal. I don't really know anything about this main character. I don't like this main character that much. Yeah, I'm really struggling to form a strong opinion on anything that happened in this book. And I think that's a shame. I just wasn't that invested. And again, maybe it was I'm reading a book that wasn't for me kind of thing. And also when he breaches, it feels like there's no real consequences. Like, obviously there's consequences in the sense that his life changes and he's not able to go back to his old life, but he didn't seem that invested in it. We don't really meet any of his friends or his family. So it's a bit of an odd, like, okay, and now you get to become a cool secret detective. I found it bizarre. Next up is Lux by Elizabeth Cook. Why was this book called Lux? This book is kind of split into 2 halves. Well, not really halves, it's more like 2/3, maybe 3/4 of a story about David and Bathsheba. And the last little bit is about King Henry and Anne Boleyn and that whole drama. I enjoyed how much of Bathsheba's perspective we got from this. I enjoyed how internal it all was. We were very much in these characters' heads rather than actually like the real world. And then when we got to the second part of the book, I remembered that the book was even called Lux. There is like so little connection between the 2 halves of this book, and I was really interested to see how they would kind of play off against each other, and they just kind of didn't, and that was a bit of a shame. I think definitely the first half of the book is the much stronger one. I think once we got into like the bit about Anne Boleyn, I kind of lost it a bit. Next up is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I wanted to like this one. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is a movie star, is being like an old Hollywood superstar, is being interviewed at the end of her life by someone, and it's like a no one reporter that gets chosen for it, and we don't know why. And she gives the account of the 7 marriages that she had throughout her life, and kind of what brought her to that point. And we kind of figure out there's a little more underneath the surface. We cycle through the husband so quickly that it's hard to get attached to any one particular period of her life. Whenever we got into the whole like, oh, it's a bunch of lavender marriages, that was really interesting. I think the whole book, I don't get this idea of like books feel the need to have a twist just for this. It felt like we just needed to have a twist. The main character is not really informed. The way that she operates does not really seem to be informed by what this twist is and how she's related to Evelyn in the end. I thought it was completely unnecessary, and it's such a wet fart of a reveal whenever it gets, whenever we actually get there. So next up is Death at the Sign of the Rook. Look, maybe this is my bad because it's clearly part of the series, but we start with this like investigation of a stolen painting and a murder, and then we go into several characters' heads for a very long amount of time. Like, I genuinely want to say up until like the middle of the book, we're hearing about how like the vicar has lost his faith, or how this character lost his leg, and how this like, and it's interesting to read about for a while, but at a certain point I was like have I accidentally picked up an anthology book? Are we gonna get back to the mystery? And genuinely, when we do, it's really fun. Like, Jackson Brodie he's quite fun. He's a quite fun character to be in the head of. His kind of partner in crime, the police officer involved in this book, is also really fun to read about. I love her trivia. I love hearing about her. And like, I'm smiling when I talk about this. It takes so long to actually get anywhere close to this. And there are some very compelling scenes in this book, particularly the ending. The ending is great. It brings a lot of the main characters into focus really well. I kind of understand why we had... I'm kind of talking myself into enjoying this book more, but I have to remember for the majority of this book I was very confused and lost. But the ending of this book, it's a genuinely action-packed ending that really caught me off guard, because so much of this book was just sitting through explanations. So the next book is A Brush with Steam by David Shepard. I think it's a very feel-good book. Listen, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, you know. It's about an artist who really got interested in painting steam engines during kind of the height of steam, and then as they started getting withdrawn, he got involved in the fledgling preservation world. He bought 2 steam engines of his own, worked with a bunch of preservation people, and just seeing like, it's an eye into this world from someone who was in this world early but also wasn't necessarily in the operations of railways while they were actually running, and you feel his passion for steam engines. Like, I love trains. Like, I love trains, specifically steam engines. Like, you feel... This book feels like it takes place in, like, even though it takes place in the real world, it takes place in, like, a Postman Pat version of the real world. Whenever he bought his first locomotive, he had to run it down. It was talking about the process of getting it to run down the main line to get to where he was going to store it, which is its own story. But the line from that book that will always stay on my mind is... He says that as he was running the train, just like light engine, people were just coming out and cheering for it, because people love steam. People love steam trains. Like, even if they're not interested in them, they just love to see them, right? And, you know, obviously it had been a while since they'd seen one. This was while steam engines were being withdrawn. And there was a woman who was standing, like, at a gravestone, and, you know, very clearly visiting a loved one who had died. We don't know who it was. And, she walked over to the fence as it was walking by, and she waved, and he said that that's the greatest honor that I have ever had. These machines brought a lot of joy to a lot of people. This person lives and breathes this hobby. It feels weird to describe like running a railway as a hobby, but I would describe it as infectiously joyful. Next up is Henry V by Dan Jones. If you wanted a biography about Henry V, here's a biography about Henry V. There's not really a lot of bells and whistles to this one, other than the book is about 50-50 between his life pre-becoming king and his life as king, which is normally the bit that people, you know, talk about, his great successes in France and like with Agincourt and stuff. And it was nice to, because I read these sort of books to get to know who these people were as human beings. What was life like back then, stuff like, which is basically when I think about what happened in this book and what happened in Henry V's life, there's not really like that many details that pop out to me as like, oh, that was a good one. There was when he got injured at Shrewsbury, and his personality seemed really interesting. But other than that, there's not a lot that had me like scrambling through the notebook to be like, oh, remember that. So next up is The House of Hidden Meanings by RuPaul. Ru has lived such an interesting life, and you know, seems like a very fun person, and so I wanted to hear about like where he came from, and you know, I thought that would be really interesting to hear about, and it was. Ru has had this genuine idea since he was a child that he's going to be famous one day and he's going to be a star, and that's what he's meant to be, and that was like preordained. And so I think because he finds it so like unremarkable that he has become famous, I think part of it is kind of like, oh yeah, and then that's just, it's RuPaul, there's only so unfun it can be, you know. It was an interesting book. It just it didn't take me where I wanted to be taken. So the next book is The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. This was a very interesting book. It's about a lot of kind of strange kind of medical cases of where people's minds have gone wrong in a very specific way, much in the way that my hair has gone wrong for this book review. A lot of this book is very interesting because there's something about the way, like, when the mind breaks in a very specific way. Like, there was a woman who, she had no sense of self, so she had no sense of where her body was in the world, and it kind of forced you to kind of play along and like be empathetic with her and imagine what it would be like to live like that. And it was kind of a challenge throughout the book. There was a lot of really potent quotes. The one I wrote down was brothers and sisters in pathology today. Like, a lot of the more interesting cases were at the front of the book, and then it got a little bit, you know, it kind of tapered out halfway through. So I wasn't like enthralled as I was at the beginning. Next up is American Kingpin by Nick Bilton. This is the final book that I finished this year. This is the final review that I'm recording. This is the story of Ross Ulbricht, the creator of The Silk Road. It was a marketplace on the dark web where people could buy literally anything, like guns, drugs, fake IDs, whatever, right? And basically how he did it, how he created it, how he got caught, the ways that he avoided capture, and it is a really interesting story. Like, I think, however, the author made this story maybe the least compelling that he possibly could have made it. I know actually quite a bit about like this case and like everything that happened, and this is maybe the least interesting piece of media that I've ever consumed on it, even though it's a full, you know, top-down breakdown of it all. It's weirdly mean-spirited about some of the people that it talks about, and I think it doesn't really go into some of the really dark things that Ross did. It kind of touches on the hits that he called out on some people, but there's, I don't know, I don't want to begrudge this book. I always say I don't want to begrudge books for what they could be, but I wasn't captured on a sentence level by what was happening, even if I actually think about it in my mind as I'm describing it. Like, this book is objectively very interesting, but I think there's only so boring you can make this topic, and I think he got pretty close to that. So next up is A Death in Diamonds by S.J. Bennett. So it's part of the Her Majesty Investigates series, and I was immediately hooked. I was so excited about this idea. I was picturing full gangsta granny, where like she was going out and like looking for clues, which wasn't the case. It was actually what I was impressed by, which was the complete opposite end of the spectrum, is that it was incredibly historically accurate. You could tell that the author put in the effort to put in a lot of her historical references at the end, and while none of this is based on true fact, it's got elements of things that have happened. And I will say, as someone who was a big fan of the Queen, and kind of one of my favorite pieces of fiction ever is the BFG, and I love that, like, just the simplicity of, okay, we've got to solve this problem, who are we going to go to? I don't know, we'll go to the Queen. There's something about that that's very like childlike and very nice, and I love the idea that like the Queen is like a detective in her spare time. The author loves history and loves the Queen, and all of that really bleeds through into the pages here. Because it was so historically accurate, a lot of it is the Queen working through other people who I just find a little bit less compelling. So it's not the most thrilling book in the world, but it's definitely fun. It was definitely a fun read and a nice cozy read, and I definitely would be wanting to read more of this series. So next up is Greenwood by Michael Christie. It starts off with this woman, and she works, I don't remember any names, this woman, and she works in a, like, it's a forest on an island in the future where trees have basically almost gone extinct. It's like a borderline post-apocalyptic future. I mean, like, she has the same surname as like the facility. It's like a sightseeing place, you know, and basically she's presented with the case of like, you might actually have a claim to own this entire thing. And then we go back through the timeline, and we all of a sudden jump to this construction worker who has just suffered what we slowly figure out is definitely a fatal accident. Like, he's gonna die, and him recounting his life, and we figure out how he's attached to the main character. And then we go back to his mum, and she uncovers certain secrets about her family, and like figure out the way that she lived. And then there's her father and her uncle, or I don't know, we'll figure it out. The whole thing is very grounded, and it's A lot of it is very sad and very tragic. These are very interesting stories. The book describes it as laid out like the rings in a tree, and I do agree with that because we get the modern day perspective and then we get the next most recent perspective, and then like it will wrap up, and then it wraps up the longest ago narrative, and then we come back and then we slowly start going through, and then it wraps everything up at the end. And so the ending is very this electric, like we're wrapping all the stories up, we figure out how everything happened, and it's a lot of stuff is revealed. It's just a shame the main character is kind of uninteresting in comparison to everything that we've just witnessed. I will say I don't like the ending. The ending is this very odd, like anticlimactic, and I suppose it fits with the theme of like life will always find a way, is very much the vibe. I don't like books that are very American, and I don't like books that are very sad. And this book was very American, and it was pretty sad. Next up is Nice Girls Don't Win by Parvati Shallow. I think it was cool. I think Parvati is just a very compelling character. I'm already invested in her as, you know, a TV personality. It was interesting. I enjoyed hearing her life from her perspective, and kind of, you know, I've seen all these seasons of Survivor over the course of like 20 years, and it was nice to see kind of her perspective and like what was going on behind the scenes during a lot of it. There's kind of a spiritual message behind a lot of this I just don't really resonate or agree with. Therefore, there's certain parts of the book where I'm going to be like, you know what, like I absolutely respect what you're saying. I'm gonna check out for this bit, and then we're gonna check back in later on. Like that's the book. Like that's me. That's not a critique on it. Next up is Blood Like Mine by Stuart Neville. This is one that I actually finished last night. I was on a fishing boat. Yeah, this was a pretty addictive read. Like, it's a mother and daughter who are living in an RV. They're on the run because the daughter is a vampire. And the way that the mother... It's very, like, let the right one in. The mother provides for the daughter by killing pedophiles. There was a lot of restraint throughout the book because I pretty quickly figured out what was going on, but it's not until about midway through the book that you actually find out, like, the word vampire is never used for a start, I don't think, but it's not spelled out explicitly what happened until midway through the book. And we also get the perspective of the police officers trying to catch the mother. The first half of this book is genuinely quite electric. I could not put it down. And then they get caught. There's very often I'll read a book where kind of the obvious climax, which is them getting caught and they have to explain the rules of how a vampire works to the police, is like the obvious climax that happens at the end. And I almost respected the book for making that choice, because it felt like, okay, well, if we're going to end up at this point anyway, then we may as well, you know, skip it and then have it happen in the middle. So it was a disappointing second half of the book. I don't know what the author had against the FBI agent. For the second half of the book, people act in very unnatural ways towards this character, and he acts in very unnatural ways towards himself, just constantly making the worst possible choice that will result in everyone turning on him, ruining his own life, and ultimately ending it. It felt like the author hated this character, and it was very uncomfortable to read. We get these interjections from like letters that people have sent to each other throughout the book. It's mostly the mother writing like a diary to her daughter, which is a very unnatural thing, and I thought it was a bit bizarre. They could have been cut. Literally, I don't think there is a single thing that we learned from these. We found out who Moonflower's dad is. That's the daughter. And that's it. Like, I don't think any crucial information from and the dad never appears in the present day. I don't think we ever learn anything important from any of this. Like, we find out anyway how she became a vampire, which is like a bit more explicitly spelled out in the letters. It basically ends in a shootout, and we get the police report from like what happened there. It just felt like we were running on fumes for the second half. So it'll be interesting to see where this lands, because there's a lot of good in this and there's a lot of boring. I wouldn't say there's anything actively bad. So next up is a book by Sean Duffy, and the reason I'm not saying the title is because during this year I told my friend, oh, I'm reading a book about Ireland in the Middle Ages, and she said, oh, what's it called? And I said, Ireland in the Middle Ages by Sean Duffy. I have always really enjoyed like kind of the pre-colonization era of Ireland. I understood that Brian Boru was this important person in Irish history, and I didn't really understand until reading this book that, oh, he was kind of the first person to unite like the kingdoms and be like High King of Ireland. This book made me a bit sad because there was this culture and this way of doing things that got erased, and I think a lot of the methods that the English used were very underhanded, but it was endlessly entertaining to read about. Like, it's one of the very few non-fiction books that I read and I was actively like taking notes. Like, I want to remember what happened in this book, which again, it's very rare that a non-fiction book will have my interest to that level. Next up is Of the Flesh by Susan Barker. This is a horror short story collection which all the stories kind of have a social commentary vibe. I think this is interesting. I honestly, my biggest problem with this book is that the worst stories are front loaded. All of the problem stories that I couldn't get into are in the first half of this book. I think the first story was solid. Flight 2212 was bad. I'm sure it was going for something, and I don't think it was good. I think a lot of the early stories really have a problem of not really feeling like they're being narrated by real people. The Fruiting Body was like creepy, like, but is it horror or is it just unpleasant? Daisies I thought was horrid. I think it was just a bad story. And then it starts to pick up. The Broccoli Eel was good. Apples was pretty good. Waffle Thomas I thought was great. The Smiling African Uncle I didn't love, but like it was definitely going for something. Like it was one of the stories where I didn't like it and then I did and then I really did and then it kind of fell apart on me, but like it definitely went for something. Yeah, and then it really hits a stride with Carcinization, Going Large, Baba Job, and Fairies. I think those are all really good stories. I think Fairies and Baba Job were like the two best stories in the book. I'm happy that I read this book because a lot of the stories have kind of stuck with me. Unfortunately, I think the rate that it bats isn't great, and it comes off as worse than it should because of the way those stories are ordered. Next book is The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay. It's a woman who finds the notes of her friend, for a book that he's going to publish, and he's dead. And she publishes it, kind of with her own little notes and interjections. And I think her parts are the best part of the book. I think she's very funny and she's very witty. I don't like this main character very much. The person who's actually writing the book. And it's kind of a borderline fictionalized account of whenever he was a kid, he had this friend who was very cool. And he kind of slowly starts to think that she might be a vampire. And it comes together very slowly. And the book is so grounded. It's like we spend so long about them living in this club and how they hang out. And it's like sometimes it feels drained after hanging out with her. He kind of builds up in his head that I think she was a vampire. And it's so interesting the way that it's done, because you do not see it coming. There's no clear premise yet, and you want to see where it happens. And it's like, okay, we're discovering whether or not she's a vampire. It skips forward in time, and I start liking this character less and less. Basically, he thinks that she's turned him into a vampire. It's kind of left up to reader interpretation whether or not she was, and if she did. In the middle of it is such a drag. It's such a drag. And it should be the most interesting bit, because it should be where he's trying to piece together whether or not she's a vampire, but he doesn't have other friends. It's just his mum. There's not really any other people in his life, and I think it kind of makes the book a bit stagnant for that period of time. All right, the next book is one that I've just finished. It is The Lake by Banana Yoshimoto. And I cringe saying the name because my friend makes fun of the way I say lake all the time. So yeah, this was a short book. It was a objectively boring book. Like nothing really happens in this book. Also, by the way, you joined me like mid-hike. Yeah, not a whole lot happens in this book. It's two people who have lost their mothers and just the journey that they go on together. It's clear that he has some traumatic past and she is a painter, and it's about her discovering what happened to him. There's not like a massive amount of tension with it. It's just kind of, I'll find out when I find out, and at the end she finds out. But it's a beautiful story leading up until that point. It's just a very soft story in this world that is populated by the two of them and a couple little characters, and it's nice. The book feels like a hug, and at the end of the day, I can't rank it terribly highly because it wasn't a page turner, was it? I was glad that it was a short book and it could only support 200 or so pages, because that's all the content that there was. But on the other hand, if you only want to write about so much, only write so much. There weren't these magnificent grand gestures of I love you and I can't live without you. It was just little things throughout the book that told me that these people are just, they're right for each other. And they visit old friends of his that live by this lake, and they're a brother and sister, and the sister is like very sick, but she's able to talk through her brother, and she's like borderline psychic, like she knows things, and it just fits into this like dreamlike. It's dreamlike. That's what it feels like. It's not explicitly like, oh, weird things are happening. It's just kind of like a lot of dream logic in this book, really, and it's very just soft and gentle, and yeah, I honestly would really recommend it because it's a short book. It's a low commitment. Okay, next up is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This book is about a woman who just does not actively live her life whatsoever. I really enjoyed the voice of this character. She's very particular and she can be rude and she's very socially unaware, but I never found her annoying. And basically the plot of this book is just by pure happenstance, she ends up encountering people and that leads to her encountering more people, and she falls in love with a member of a band that she sees. I think it's like on social media, or maybe I don't even think she's seen them in person. And to attract the attention of one of the band members that she's in love with, she buys a computer. She gets her phone onto social media. She runs into people and she ends up befriending someone who dyes her hair for her, and she does a proper she starts taking care of herself and she starts living her life. And of course it's all in this vain attempt to get the attention of this band member who's never gonna recognize her. But it's, it's dramatic irony used for good, because the entire time you're yes, Eleanor, fall into my trap, start living a good life. It's very nice to read about. Some of it is a bit slow, because it is just regular things happening, and it's not necessarily described in the most interesting way, but it is very compelling to just kind of watch her improve her life. And I don't know, maybe I'm recording this in the middle of a shed in northern Cyprus, miles away from all my friends, so maybe it's just really hitting me right now, but I don't know, it's nice that the message of this book was she didn't have to try to get people to like her. She just had to try to love herself. And I don't mean love herself as in thinking she's alright, I mean love herself as in treating herself well. She doesn't have to try to change herself. She never once has to try to get people to like her. She doesn't even really want people to like her very much, and yet they do. Eleanor just by herself has things that she brings to the table, no matter how weird she is. I've seen books described before as life-affirming, and I don't really know what that means. But if I were to describe any book on this list as life-affirming, it would be this one. So next up is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This is the sequel to the original Hunger Games book. Katniss and Peeta go back into the Hunger Games where it's all victors. Generally, I think the consideration amongst the fandom is that, and the public at large, is that this, along with more so the movie, but also this book, are the good ones. And I was a little disappointed. Of course, everything great about this, about the Hunger Games franchise as a whole is good in this book. The first half of this book is the better half, where we get to see Katniss's life after becoming a victor, how she's adjusting to that, the tightrope she's walking, trying to keep everyone safe. And I think it's some of the most interesting content in the entire series, because it's one of the few times that we actually just get to see her live her life. The big problem with this book really is the Hunger Games themselves. I think there's a lot of time given to characters that kind of die without a lot of ceremony, and a lot of whom die off screen, off book, off page. And I find that to be very bizarre. I want to enjoy this world, I want to get into the lore and learn about who these people are, but at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like anyone cares. And part of that is by design. The whole point of this is that the games are kind of broken this time around. No one cares about the parade, no one cares about training, no one cares about the interviews. They're trying to ruin everything, and some of that is interesting to read, and some of it isn't very fun to read, specifically because it feels like we're retreading the same thing as last time, but it's no one involved is putting in any effort. And while it does make sense why that's the case, I do question how fun that is. This should be the most dangerous positions that Katniss and Peeta have ever been put in, and yet it feels like everyone is kind of the games are kind of a pushover, really. A lot of people, we don't see a lot of the deaths, and most of them happen very quickly. There's this massive alliance, and we don't really get to, because of the perspective, we don't get to really see the alliance come together, so it doesn't really feel like it makes a lot of sense, and it isn't very rewarding. I will say the very ending of it is incredible. The way that she escapes the arena is, the way it comes together is so satisfying, and it doesn't feel contrived at all. It feels like we're using all the tools that we have, and it completely makes sense. So I think I've skewed more negative in my thoughts on the book, but more so because this is considered to be a really, really great book, and I think it just kind of disappointed me in some ways. So next up is My Friends by Fredrik Backman. So this is about a girl who has escaped from the system, and she's about to turn 18, and she runs into a famous artist on the day that his painting is being sold, which is also the day that he happens to die. he paints with her, does graffiti a bit, and they run from the police together. And then he decides that to use all of his savings to buy his own painting back from the auction. And like, she's obsessed with his paintings, has been her entire life, and he decides that he wants her to have the painting. And the whole journey is about his friend who gives the painting to her and how they go on a journey together. And I love this book. I love, no matter where it ends up on this list, I do love it because it's so beautiful. It takes place in this optimistic world where things are just beautiful and friends are angels. Great. On the other hand, this book pissed me off all the time. By the second half, I think every single sentence had a simile or a metaphor. Everything was as if something else was happening. He laughed as if the train was going to shake. Like, it was very that. And I think the theme of this year, Trandler, is that I don't like the endings. I didn't particularly like the ending of this book. But I'm willing to forgive so much of that for the moments where I wanted to cry reading this book, because it took so many shots at finding something beautiful, and it did strike a couple times. I think specifically about whenever they thought they'd lost the painting, and it turns out the friends that they'd made just by existing on the train were there to help them out. Like this woman whose baby they'd held for a couple of minutes so she should go to the toilet, and she sat and waited on the platform for them for hours. Or whenever they got lost, this taxi driver decided to help them catch up to the train, and she knows that it's not possible, but she just wants to go for it. And these characters made me feel so alive. Listen, maybe it's a little too cute and a little too convenient that everything just kind of, everyone has like a little moment of catharsis and everything just kind of works out even when it's sad. But I don't know, I think it's nice to put down the cynicism and just enjoy a book like this for what it is, no matter how much it made me viscerally angry with how too cute it was trying to be. I will say, what did annoy me about this book was it kind of treated life as if there was a special group of people that were a little bit smarter than everyone, a little bit better than everyone else. And I understood it when it was from the perspective of this teenage girl, and that's like how she functions in the world. But I don't think that the narrative ever really challenged that, and it felt weird because it felt like there's this club, and it's like, one day we'll find another one of us, and then these are the people that get to be like part of this little circle. Next up is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the first time I've read a book as it came out, and I was hooked. I read it like in one day. My biggest takeaway from this book is that it actually makes Catching Fire a better book. I think it gives some details that Catching Fire couldn't quite give because it was from Katniss's perspective. I think there's so much interesting stuff here. I loved being in Hamish's point of view. I loved this group of kids. For the first time we have like a group, and I'm really attached to all of them. The dialogue here is really good. You can tell that Maisley is supposed to, there's nothing I hate more than a character that's supposed to be funny and snarky and like can really get a character, and they're just not, and it's really cringe. There's nothing that makes me want to die more. But Maisley is genuinely really funny. So yeah, I got attached to a lot of these people. I got attached to the newcomers. Like everyone has said, like the epilogue is a weapon of mass destruction, which like, I don't think it got me in the same way that it got a lot of people, but I'm excited to talk about this book. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff here, like what happened to Luella. The games suck. There's some interesting stuff that happens, but it's, for all the time that we spent talking about the newcomers, almost all of them die off screen. Haymitch himself spends almost no time with the people in that alliance. It's bizarre. The porcupine scene, I'm excited to see when the movie comes out, because the porcupine scene was really weird. I also think that the inclusion of Mags and Wyrus was not fan servicey in their inclusion, but it did start to feel that way because they have no character in this book. I will say, when Wyrus walks in, and we know Wyrus, it's almost like a joke. Where she goes, "Hi, I'm Wyrus, how are you?" Like, she's so normal, right? And so immediately we know, oh no. They were very flat. They have no real character in this. They feel like they are vehicles for the plot to happen, and their personalities are just nice. We have so little to get excited about in this life. So a new Hunger Games book in 2025 is... Alright, next up is A Great and Terrible King by Mark Morris. I had set myself the goal of reading more non-fiction books this year, and I've always been very interested in medieval monarchs. This book is about Edward I, King Edward I of England, and I loved it. I think it's not told in a especially artistic way. Yeah, I feel this is going to be underwhelming, especially because I think this is actually going to rank quite highly. It's just it's a very interesting book about a very interesting person, and that's all there is really. That's all there is really to say. This is a great summer read. So next up is A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So we're kind of used to it now, but I remember when I first heard about this, I kind of couldn't believe we were getting a book from Snow's perspective, mostly because I didn't really think it made a lot of sense. But I think it works and doesn't work for different reasons. I think it works particularly in the sense that Lucy Gray Baird really works through Snow's perspective, because she is already a very interesting character. She doesn't seem to fit into the world, although she's a character that loves colour and she loves music. And then she gets erased from history, and I think the fact that we only ever get to see her from Snow's perspective completely adds to the mystery of her character and the myth that surrounds her. I think the ending of it is perfect as well, obviously. I think Snow's perspective does hinder the book a little bit in that it makes the games a little less interesting. There are so many characters, there are so many names in this book. Like, I don't think we needed a list of every single tribute, let alone all of their mentors. I don't think that really added much. There's a lot of little characters that Snow has to get stuff from throughout the book, and I just don't know, like, a lot of moving parts kind of fall by the wayside. And I do understand, because this book takes place in a much larger time scale than a lot of the other books do, so there's a lot more to cover. And as well, like, Snow's a very self-serving person, so it kind of makes sense that once he has something from someone, he kind of moves on and he forgets about them. It's very satisfying to see an era of this world which has been so far from being touched on. It feels like it takes place in a different time period. You know what's going to happen. You know what happens when this person gets any sort of power. This is the one time in his life that he could have been stopped, and it makes him feel like almost like an inevitable force. Like, legit, he feels unstoppable in what he's going to do, even if he's not directly evil yet. And it makes it's a very interesting perspective to be in, and I think it handles that a lot better than the movie does, I'll say that. So it is quite distressing to kind of be on this ride and be inside his head and not be able to do anything. So next book is Never the Wind by Francesco Dimitri. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This book is about a boy who suddenly goes completely blind the same summer as his parents move from the north of Italy down to the south to develop a villa. During this time, he meets a girl who lives nearby, and they seemingly encounter some supernatural happenings. I loved being in the head of this main character. I think it was so interesting to pick someone who had recently gone blind and kind of learning to accommodate all that with him. And, like, you slowly have to remind yourself, like, you're so used to having characters that are fully sighted, you slowly have to remind yourself there are certain things that he can't do, and how certain things that they're trying to do throughout the book are genuinely really dangerous. I think it was very creepy, and it was very subtly creepy for a while. I enjoyed the idea of what kind of the supernatural element of this was. There's nothing I love more than the feeling of, is there anything supernatural happening, or are we making this up? When you find out towards the end that, like, there's a point where the main character takes a picture and then shows it to his friend, and she describes what's in the picture, and she's like, oh my word, like, I've seen it too. And then later on he shows it to his brother, and he finds out that the picture actually was blank, and she was trying to convince him because her parents are going to kill her. It's intense, because the plan basically is to kill her parents to free her, and you don't know if she's correct. The parents are lovely people, and you want to believe them, and it's this. My biggest issue with this book is the theme of this year is bad endings. I think there is a particular point in this book where kind of this phrase, never the wind, has come up throughout the book. Praise God, never the wind. And at a certain point, he decides to literally start praising the wind. And this scene made me want to die. It made me want to crawl out of my skin. It genuinely was so cringy to me. And the ending was very, like, I don't know, it just went in a direction that it went from being very subtly creepy and supernatural into just a very severe, like, we are worshipping this entity now. Next up is Undoctored by Adam Kay. This is probably the funniest book that I've read this year. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. This is about a comedian who previously was a doctor, had to leave the field, and what happened to him and how he rebuilt his life after he finished being a doctor. And came out and left his wife and like, everything that happened. So it's a really funny book. It's dark, but it just in terms of like, he went to some dark places in his life, and it's a very unflinching account of everything that happened, and it's a fascinating story of like kind of walking away from almost everything that he had in his life. Yeah, honestly, it just feels like listening to someone tell a story really, really well, and it's such an enjoyable and such an easy read. Next up is Queen of Our Times by Robert Hardman. This is a book about Queen Elizabeth II. I could not put this one down. I could not stop reading it. And nonfiction had never done that to me before. It was so interesting to hear so many details about her it was so well researched, and it was so interesting to kind of get an insight into the person that she is and really put her whole reign into perspective. There were so many stories that I was beaming at hearing, like the time that someone impersonated the Canadian Prime Minister and made a phone call to the Queen in French, and she flawlessly spoke back to him in French, and the fact that that's a real recording that we can go and listen to, and it's like, oh wow. Next up is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. It has been a while since a horror book has really gotten me. Yeah, this book is weird. It's about this woman. She wants to help out her uncle, who runs basically picture the Mystery Shack from Gravity Falls, and you're pretty much there. She has a neighbor who, it's said that he absorbed his twin in the womb. And through one eye, sometimes you can see kind of weird things. And there's just like a cute little detail of like, we're not going to explain that. That's just kind of like, this is the thing that happens. And it fits perfectly into like the kind of vibe of this book. A hole opens up in the wall, and she goes through it, and it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder and scarier and scarier and scarier. This book genuinely like gave me chills. Like I was horrified, and it's one of the books I read so quickly because I literally could not put it down. I wanted to be able to sleep. Basically this other world where anything could be trying to kill you at any point and you wouldn't quite be aware of it, and they don't even fully know the rules, and it seems like it's like a land between the universes. It's very like the wood between the worlds, but it's like the beaches between the worlds from Narnia, and they lose the way that they got into it. And they have to like find their way back, and basically everything here is weird and hostile and scary, and there's so many very, very disturbing images in this. Horror can get a bit macabre and a bit depressing, but this book is funny. This book is a really fun read. The characters banter a lot, and these characters are funny. I really, really enjoyed listening to them talk. You know, they get back into the real world, and they realize that like basically in their sleep they are knocking down the door to get back through there, which is a horrifying thought, because like the last thing that they barely only got back the first time. How do you end this book? And I think the problem with ending this book is that you can only really have it stop. You can't solve the mystery, you can't really give too many answers, but yeah, it just stops. There's like a big fight, and I didn't like the ending to this book, which is kind of a running theme of this year. Next up is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak, which I am so sorry if I pronounced that wrong, which I think I have. This is a special book. It follows water and like the water cycle, and like so through rain and evaporating back up into the sky, and then, you know, going through rivers. It's all the characters are based around rivers. We start with King Ashurbanipal in ancient Mesopotamia, and that was a very gripping scene, and it kind of almost sets up every single theme that we're going to get to. There are these like linking themes throughout all of the characters in this book, through all these places and all these times, and they're all linked by like these little appearances of these little figurines, or, you know, it'll mention the Epic of Gilgamesh, or it'll mention different things that appeared in different character stories. And it's a great use of dramatic irony, because we're almost kind of like, it's almost like they're these specters that are like these supernatural things that are lingering throughout the book, but it never really draws that much attention to them, and there's no point where like all the characters like link up or become aware that they're like connected or something. It's very restrained in the way that it does it. It was so well written as well. There's so many words in this book that I was like, okay, added to the vocabulary. We start with this kid who is born on the Thames in Victorian London, and he wants to translate the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it takes him to this land, and he meets the ancestor of another one of the characters, who's this little girl, and she's going deaf, and her grandmother, they're like a minority religious group in this place, and her grandmother wants to take her to, you know, this very important holy ground, and it's set against, you know, everything that was happening with ISIS, and it's heavy. It is, and it does it respectfully, and it's done beautifully, but it's It's a tough read. It's a really, really tough read. And then we have the modern day on the Thames. It's this woman, she's gone through a divorce, and she is connected to the other two characters in a very different way, and I think this is the least compelling of the narratives. I think she is almost kind of there to wrap the story up in a bow. Like, I don't think as much care was given to her story. I just wasn't very interested in her. It wasn't bad. It just kind of felt like every time she definitely appeared a lot less than everyone else, and I think the author kind of realized that, like, you know, we're gonna get her sparingly just to kind of see what's happening. And it's a book that I can sit and talk about forever and ever and ever. Like, I recommended it to my friend, and she and I, we sat down and we talked about it for so long. I definitely will be reading a lot more from this author. I know she wrote a book set in Cyprus, where I'm literally living in Cyprus, and I didn't get around to reading it. So next up is Darius the Great is Not Okay. This is about a half Persian kid. He has never visited Iran, but suddenly his grandfather on his mother's side is dying. He's never met his grandparents from Iran in person, and the family are going to go see them. He doesn't really fit in. He doesn't get on with his dad. He gets picked on at school. It's not going great for him. He's self-confidence issues. He loves Star Trek. And he goes to Iran and just has not even necessarily a transformative experience. Like, it's what I love is this book is very realistic. The tragedy in this book is like, it's a personal tragedy, right? Like, his grandfather is dying and they can only visit for a certain amount of time, and then they have to go, and then he's never going to see him again. Honestly, this book just feels good. It feels good to read about. I really wanted to read a lot more just like people existing books this year. He makes a friend while he's there, and it's so fun to read about. It's just nice to see him getting on with people. And, you know, he finds out that, like, oh, he's good at football, and people just like him, and there's something just very affirming about he feels like he has to try so hard to fit in, but when he finds the people that actually like him, he's able to just exist, and he's surprised that they like him back. And there's a conversation, honestly, if I can recommend this book at all, it's purely just read it for, there's a conversation that Darius has with his dad at the end of the book, which is genuinely devastating. It's not sad. Like, it's good that they're having this conversation, but I'm getting choked up thinking about it. It hit me in a very personal way. This book cares so much about its characters. These are all people. They're all fully realized people. I love Darius as a point of view character. I'm rooting for him, but he's not pathetic. Sometimes he might think he is, but he genuinely isn't. Like, he makes an effort, and he tries, and he lives his life, and he's nice to read about, but also rootable. And I'm in love with this world. It just feels very true, and it feels very human, and I was a big fan of this book. Next up is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and I think at this point it's pretty hard to have an original thought about this book because it genuinely just is that good. The things that really struck me about this book is that everything about Katniss's character is so important to the plot and the way that she thinks. This is such a well thought out character, and her mind is so lived in this book. Like, I feel like we explore so much of how she is, and she's a very insular character, and that she's really always like very like reflecting on herself and what she's thinking. And I often find that I think this kind of died off, but I think up until recently there was a real trend with fans of The Hunger Games to either kind of apologize for it being a love story, or to kind of be like, oh no, it's not really, she only put it in there but it's like, the romance in this book is genuinely really good. Like, I buy it. Like, I believe in it. The bit where they're in the cave and she's like caring for him, and she's starting to, like, you know, be like, I have to keep him alive, and it's really, like, it's sweet. I actually really find myself enjoying the romance aspect of this book. I enjoy that, like, there's so many things about her life in 12 which both feed into the world building and also feed into her character and how she performs in the games, and these are the best the games have ever been. Like, when she almost dies of thirst, like, I feel that journey with her. There's a reason this book series caught on the way that it did. I think at this point, like, saying that The Hunger Games is good is like saying that water is wet. But guys, like, The Hunger Games is really good, and it genuinely may be the top book this year. I don't know yet,